But it's been a day of more forced evacuations of Palestinians in 4 parts of Gaza City. The IDF spokesperson said his troops had sent a final warning ahead of what it called an impending strike to root out Hamas operatives and infrastructure. The evacuation comes in the midst of the Eid al-Adha holiday, one of the main religious festivals of the Muslim calendar. Well, much focus has also been on what food and water 2 million Palestinians are getting access to in the Strip. The controversial Gaza Humanitarian Fund, the Israeli-US-backed distribution hubs, were described as just a pretense for aid this week by a number of aid organisations. The 4 sites have been suspended and reopened several times, with dozens of people killed after being fired at in a queue outside the hubs. Israel saying its troops were under threat. Let's go to Geneva. Let's speak to Martin Griffiths, the UN's former humanitarian relief coordinator who spent 5 decades working in humanitarian affairs and conflict mediation. Martin is the executive director now of the Mediation Group International. Welcome to France 24, Martin. Let's first begin, if we can, in Gaza and the emergence of the Gaza Humanitarian Fund and your take on the chaos we're seeing, the deaths of Palestinians, that aid groups in several countries are demanding are independently investigated, and yet Israel is insisting it's working, it's cutting Hamas out of the loop. What's your take?
Well, I'm a bit conflicted on this, Gavin, in the sense that we all predicted this would be, in the words of one commentator, a shambolic operation, because, for example, it doesn't include monitoring. So they talk about 9 million meals, but who did they go to? Where are they? It is a militarized operation. It's designed to have an IDF camp right beside the first and main distribution point. The security was clearly part of the mandate of IDF, and we've seen it in the tragic killings since the beginning of this operation. And it doesn't have the reach to reach the 2 million, who are mostly in the north, who are being drawn south. So we knew it was going to go wrong, but I think even we didn't realize how badly wrong it was going to go. We knew that there would be pressure at these distribution points, and we've seen all the pictures of that and the tragedy of those queues and the people talking about taking away nothing. This was predicted, but even so, it's shocking to the international conscience that it's worked out like this, with the brazen support of some governments, of course, including Israel. So that's my first point, Gavin. What I'd like to just touch on is the news that we have heard through you and others of Prime Minister Netanyahu's claim that he's providing weaponry and support to gangs in Gaza.
Yes.
Thank you very much. Attempting to have them fight against Hamas. Well, you know, in one extent, we've seen this before some years ago when Prime Minister Netanyahu was keen to have Hamas supported, including some financial subsidies through their presence in Qatar, in order to provide a division between them and Fatah. Didn't work then. This is a disaster because of the situation in the camp. And then thirdly, because of that claim that this is all about leakage to Hamas, the UN keeps telling us, I was very aware of this when I was there, there's no evidence to support the claims made by it is leaking to Hamas. And of course, these distribution points, because they don't reach into the Strip, aren't going to provide us with those evidence. And I gather now the GHF is even criticizing or saying that IDF is responsible for the violence, the killings, because of the great threats that IDF says is coming from those needing food. I don't buy it, but it's getting worse.
And yet not clarifying, to which we're trying to get an answer to, Martin, what that threat was. And when we speak to the Israeli government spokesman or spokespeople, we're told to speak to the IDF. And when we try to speak to the IDF, we're told to speak to the government spokespeople. So we're going round in circles. And I want to look at that as well, in particular, the idea that when we're not there, when international journalists are banned from being able to give an overview, to try to verify, to try to cooperate, that you are in this world of constant counter-narratives. I want to talk about that in a moment, but I want to pick up on your point, first of all, about Benjamin Netanyahu talking today, admitting that he's supporting an opposing militant group in Hamas. This is a Bedouin tribe led by Yasser Abu Shabab. This is described by the European Council on Foreign Relations think tank as the leader of a criminal gang operating in Rafah. Let's have a listen today to Benjamin Netanyahu explaining.
On the advice of security officials, we activated clans in Gaza that oppose Hamas. What's wrong with this? This is only good and saves the lives of IDF soldiers. The publication of this only benefits Hamas, but Lieberman doesn't care.
So the context here, Martin, Avigdor Lieberman, the ex-defence minister, speaking to public broadcaster Khan in the past few days, saying that Netanyahu is giving weapons to a group of criminals and felons. So it's a leak that he's confirmed, saying that, in his words, it's only good at saving the lives of Israeli soldiers. But as you say, we should look at this because suddenly this is a new development. And on one level, we're told that journalists shouldn't be there, the Israeli government saying you would be killed straight away by Hamas. On the next level, we're told that actually it's OK to work with another group.
Yes, it's totally absurd. I mean, it's surreal, really, what's going on now, if that's the right word for the terrible tragedy of what we see right in front of us. But as you say, first of all, Gavin, no journalists. We see very few journalists being allowed to go into Sudan. It's telling, obviously. It's not for nothing that public witnesses, which are essential not only to international security and norms, but also to our operations, humanitarian operations, are not allowed in. It's there for a reason. And like you, I've been seeing comments from Israeli officials, one of which is saying, we will not allow you back, journalists, because we want the hostages out. Well, it's not either or for a start. So that's telling. And secondly, just to back that up, throughout this terrible war, this 19-20 months of war, there have been massive numbers of claims from Israel, going back to the early days of accusing UNRWA of complicity in October the 7th, some of its staff. None of these claims have yielded evidence. None of these claims have provided for an independent investigation, like the Secretary General is now asking for on these events that we're discussing. Claims don't work. Claims need to be produced in objective evidence and accountability. The killing of those 15 Palestinian Red Crescent and one UN worker, as you remember, Gavin, a few weeks ago, clearly evidence through that video that was bravely shot by one of those killed, is clear about who is at fault. There was an investigation apparently by the IDF, not public, and there's some question about whether a platoon commander or a senior commander may have been removed. That's not the point. The point is it's impunity, and particularly in the humanitarian world. So it's a devil's place, I think, for what's going on now for the people of Gaza and OPT. I mean, look at the West Bank, but also, Gavin, last point on this.
Yeah.
Many people have said it. I've said it. What happens in Gaza doesn't stay in Gaza. This is looked at with great care across the world of conflicts. Is it now acceptable to have humanitarian aid run by an organization which is clearly not neutral? It's been the fundamental criterion for 50, 60 years. And now we see it jettisoned casually and incompetently in this case. What do you think they might be thinking in Sudan and Afghanistan and elsewhere? It has legs. It will carry.
And this is where, and you talk about those killed in that ambulance, that convoy of ambulances in Rafah, this 5-6 minute video to which they were shot at pretty much unrelentingly. The mobile was picked up. And again, the counter-narrative, the first we heard was that they were being targeted. They were moving without lights. And then suddenly it transpired after the mobile footage that wasn't the case. So again, that casts doubt on transparency that we're told all the time. The conflation as well, we should add, which is between the government investigation into the government to being called anti-Semitism for that, to which we've also put towards to the Israeli government. Let me ask you as well, you've said previously in interviews over time that we are now finding in the world people who think they are right all the time, and that's what we're seeing worldwide, and that itself is an obstacle to any mediation. Tell us about that.
Well, I think it's a terrible sin, which we've seen through history, really. People who think they're right all the time, we all know who we're talking about here, are absolute demons in terms of dialogue and compromise and concessions and thinking of others. Obviously, it's in their weeds that they don't. You can't end wars if you don't think of others. And when you refer this to the Gaza situation and its future, I don't think any of us believe, and even senior Israeli political figures are saying this now, that this desire to eliminate Hamas in Gaza will do anything other than to build a generation of jihadists against Israel, which none of us want. Israel's security is vital, but it's mutual. So those who are right don't consider those who they think automatically must be wrong. That's a very, very serious problem.
We're also noticing, Martin, and from you as well this week, language is changing, language is hardening. You talked about, and you must have thought about this, that using the term genocide in an interview. We've also seen, I just want to bring up this message this week from a current UN colleague, the Special Rapporteur, Francesca Albanese, saying, I'm calling it is what it is. You said genocide because it is genocide. Now, legally, South Africa's case against the ICJ is still ongoing. It hasn't ruled on that, and Israel vehemently denies that. But as a legal perspective, as you in your legal profession, this is something that you'd clearly thought about long and hard.
Yes, there is a maxim in the law that I learned, at least. I was a British barrister and an American attorney, called "the thing speaks for itself." It's in Latin, it's res ipsa loquitur, but it's about, absolutely as Francesca says, it is what it is. And there's a point in law when the further legal disclaimers and discussions and so forth need to be contextualized by reality on the ground. And what I am speaking for, of course, as all humanitarians do, is that last thing. We're talking about lived experience. We're talking about what is happening to the people of Gaza. And just therefore to say that, and of course it was a decision of mine, Gavin, was not lightly taken, because I don't think there's any real reason anymore not to think so. Now, the ICJ has also ordered all states, parties to the Geneva Conventions, as you know, to take action. And we've seen a change in rhetoric. I mean, France is playing a massively important role on this. And, you know, hooray for President Macron and for your the conference coming up in New York in a week or two, hosted by France and Saudi Arabia on the two-state solution. Incredibly useful. But as everybody says, where's the action? And for politicians to say we are considering consequences when action is needed to stop today's consequences and the death of those huge increases in malnourished children, the death of those trying to get food in the south of Gaza, it's not sufficient. It's not meeting legal obligations to wait to see what consequences might be. Stop the arms, review the investment, and go public on investigations.
To which President Macron was described by the Israeli foreign minister as on a, quote, crusade against the Jewish state. And also they make the point, a point which is perfectly valid, which Hamas could let the hostages go right away, and also saying that they are defending from the massacres of what happened on October the 7th. Now, both those two things can exist at the same time. The other point to you, your life hasn't been made very easy. You were declared persona non grata, weren't you, at some stage shortly after the Hamas massacres. Your relations with Israel, you still, I think I'm right in saying, managed to go into Israel and speak to politicians despite that. Is that right?
I did once, right at the beginning, and a very useful visit to Jerusalem and Tel Aviv. But then I was declared PNG. I was never going to get a visa, and it was said so publicly. Because what actually happened, Gavin, was the humanitarian community and the committee that I chaired at that time of the leaders of the humanitarian community globally decided at that time, in November, late November, going into December, to issue a statement saying a permanent ceasefire is the only way out of this. Now, you know, it took a long time for governments around the world to come around to that, but we did it very quickly, again, because we saw the reality in front of us. And that did it for me, I'm afraid.
You've said before, and when we step back and look at your career, it's involved meetings with people in very difficult places, whether it's the Taliban in Afghanistan, whether it's the regime in Myanmar, whether it's both of the rival leaders of the paramilitary and the army in Sudan, face-to-face talks, whether it's Russian leaders as well. You've talked about in the past that your drive has been to try to appeal to the better angels in people. How do you find those better angels right now in Gaza?
I hope it's not a life wasted, because you're right, Gavin. That's exactly what has driven me. And I had a very clear sort of comeuppance, really, because I met President Assad, who I'd known for some years through UN political missions, initially through Kofi Annan as the envoy. And I met him after the earthquakes 3 times during the course of that year, 2023, with the endeavor to get the better angels, bizarre as that may seem now. And he said on the 3rd occasion, because we were trying to get refugees back, we were trying to get rid of conscription, we were trying to get the jails emptied. I was. And eventually he said, no, I don't need to anymore because there's no political pressure on me. I've been allowed back into the Arab League and so forth. And then, a few months later, he got the comeuppance that he deserved. So that was an example of me just getting it wrong, I think. And thank God for al-Julani al-Shara to take action where feeble liberals like mine were still asking for dialogue. So there are clear examples where it doesn't work. This is one, but this will not be resolved in terms of the future stability of the region and the norms in the world without that kind of pressure and dialogue and concessions. China, as you know, Gavin, convened Fatah and Hamas many months ago to resolve their differences. Hamas, which committed those terrible acts, has frequently stated it wants to and will withdraw from Gaza. There are things to pick up, but the ceasefire talks are still based on a fundamental misalignment of the 2 parties. So Prime Minister Netanyahu always clear about his objectives, saying elimination of Hamas, we've touched on that, and Hamas saying complete withdrawal. So it's very difficult for these brave mediators, but I don't see that working until there's a real discussion of concessions. That brings the road back to Washington.
Martin, a delight to talk to you this evening. Martin Griffiths, we will talk again in future because I also want to talk to you about power draining for mediation from the West towards the global South as well, and to new mediators in the Gulf. We will talk anon. Martin Griffiths, for now, thank you. Former UN Humanitarian Chief and Operating Officer at the Mediation Group International. Stay with us here on France 24. We'll be back in just a moment.